Of course, you're not as old as some of the people I've interviewed. I think the oldest one I've interviewed so far was 101. But I do think that you had some significant experiences and in some areas that would be worth keeping for our libraries. Now, first of all, tell us your parents.
Benton Trevathan and Valley Irene Combs
Now,
were
they were both from sort of in the Hardin area also?
Callaway County, up around Alamo.
Uh-huh.
They were both born near Alamo. And then Mother's father moved to Hardin when she could go to high school because they had a new high school there, and they moved there in about 1912.
That was the second high school in the county. And incidentally, of course, it was in Callaway, but there was only one high school in Callaway then. That was Murray High.
Mm-hmm.
And any number of people moved to Hardin and or boarded at Hardin. I remember one time Homer Holland told me, and Homer was the famous coach of the Sharp Green Devils of 1938 who won the first state championship that a Marshall County school was to win. And he said that he moved to Hardin and boarded there and went to high school just as people later went to college.
Mm-hmm. They did.
And he had heard that Hardin was the best high school around, and there were some famous teachers there. People like Junius Lewis were quite noted, and so on. Well, that's fine. So your grandfather was interested in education. It's always amazed me how Kentuckians and even Americans were so interested in education. Just one example would be in New England. They landed at Plymouth Rock. It was nearly 1621, December 1620. And then by 1636, they had established Harvard College. Now that, to me, 16 years out of the wilderness,
Mm-hmm.
it showed where their priorities were, wasn't it? They wanted those children to get an education. And they set up a printing press in 1638. Actually, they built a high school a year before. The first high school in America was Boston Latin High School in 1635. Now, even more amazing to me, although the country was a little older then, but they crossed the Appalachians. A group of hunters were at the site of Lexington, Kentucky, when the news came that late in that summer, that way back on April the 19th, 1775, that there had been the Battle of Lexington. So they named that spot Lexington. And 5 years later, they had the first university west of the mountains, Transylvania.
Ray, I'm wondering if it's part of that was because most of the people who came here were from England and Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them were Protestants that came on down into this area.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if that had something to do with it.
Oh, evidently, no doubt it did.
There are teachers and preachers both on both sides
Mhm.
of my family.
Yes.
That came, some of them were born on my mother's side, the Kennedys. My great-great-grandfather came to, my great-great-grandfather, that's right, 3 greats back, was
Mhm.
born in Kentucky in 1787. And so they had come down, evidently the Ohio, to Nelson County.
Yeah.
And he had drifted on down here by 1818
Mm-hmm.
into this area.
That was the very, very beginning of the
Mhm.
purchase region, because it
Yes.
wasn't bought till the 19th of October that year.
That's true, but his father and his grandfather both were in the Revolution, and they were spies, or they fought with the Indians, Clark.
George Rogers Clark
uh-huh,
and
and
the
the
Kentucky or Virginia militia.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, and they went up into southern Illinois.
They won
Uh-huh.
Illinois. They won the whole Northwest, actually.
Mhm.
A lot of people don't realize how great that was. And with about 180 men, Clark took what later was to become the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin,
Mhm.
and Minnesota.
Mhm.
all of that area changed hands. Now, Virginia ceded her claim, of course, in the Old Point Comfort original. Well, it was the Second Amendment to the Charter, really, of 1606. But Virginia was told that their land ran from sea to sea.
Mm-hmm.
So they really could have claimed all the way to California. And in order to get the other states to join the Union under the new Constitution in 1785 or 1787, Virginia ceded that. The Great Northwest Ordinance of 1787 gave that to the United States if all the others would join in and form a new nation under the Constitution which they had just finished at Philadelphia. Well, that was certainly a magnanimous decision. Virginia is called the mother of presidents, and really, in one way of speaking, it's the mother of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's amazing to me is how those people that in that time, before 1800, would just drift on down to West Kentucky, across both rivers.
Oh, yes.
Into what is now Marshall County.
It's stunning to many people to note that Thomas Jefferson's sister, Lucy Jefferson
Mm-hmm.
Lewis, is buried right over here near
Mm-hmm.
Smithland. And, of course, you've probably read that horrible book, horrible in some ways, about Jefferson's nephews
Right.
and the crime that they committed over there and the murder of some slaves and so forth.
Now, my father's people, the Mannings, came up, and the Trevathans came up through Tennessee.
Was Trevathan a French name?
No, Trevathan, it was Trevathan in
Mhm.
Wales.
Yeah.
Welsh.
Yes.
There's some Welsh background.
Yes.
I'm just all Scottish, English, and Welsh. That's about it on both sides.
Well,
of
that's
my
about
family.
as British as one could be.
About as Protestant as you can get, too.
Yeah. Well, oh, that's wonderful. That's one. And you have helped some of our genealogists of the future. And you're eligible to be a member of the DAR if you
Yes.
aren't.
On both sides. Through the Mannings, that goes back to Colonel Calloway.
Colonel Calloway,
Yes.
who was with Daniel Boone,
Yes.
and one of the Boones married a Calloway,
Uh-huh.
Calloway's daughter. Yeah, that's fine. Well, you've certainly traced your ancestors way, way back. Now, let me ask you quickly about, you went to school in Benton, I presume.
We went from, I was just a baby, we went to Dawson Springs, and then where my father...
We worked in the bank.
Incidentally, my father finished the 8th grade,
Mm-hmm.
but he was as well educated as anybody I have ever seen to not had any more formal education. He went to work young. He had to at 12 years old. And anyway, he has always been, he was always interested in any kind of education. He served on even the State Board of Education.
I always said he was a natural banker.
Well, he was that too.
He,
Probably not in the sense of, my father wanted to help people, and he could do it helping them with their financial troubles.
a man at Murray one time told me, I guess this is a compliment, but he said that Loman Trevathan is the George Hart of Marshall County.
Well, that could be.
They
Or
meant it
vice
for a
versa.
Yeah, vice versa.
That could be turned around. But he was an unusual person because people in this county just, well, even now, so many people, every time I go out, somebody will say how much they thought of my father because they helped them do so-and-so.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing what a low loss ratio he had. Of course, in some ways, after the Depression ended and the World War II was over, we always had good times, and so everything was a favorable era. But George Hart told me once that he and Loman had about the same philosophy. He said that, they'd make loans on the basis of who you were and who your parents were, and they knew the background. I know when my mother was sick, I went to Loman on a Tater Day, 1951. There was 4-inch snow on the ground that morning.
I remember that very well.
And I said, Loman, I need $1,000. My mother's in the hospital. She's been operated on. I've got to pay the bill to get her out, and I don't have the money. He said, just sign your name here. I said, you mean I don't need any co-signers? Nope. Nope. He said, I'll risk you. And, of course, I understand you can't do that with everybody that walks in the door, certainly, but, and George Hart would do things like that, too.
Daddy was a reader of character.
Mm-hmm.
He had a knack for someone that you probably wouldn't trust anything with. He would lay it on the line to them until they felt like they were obligated to keep his trust in them.
Well, I once heard him say that, and I heard Mr. Hart say almost exactly the same thing one time, that he'd rather make a note on character than on a fella that had a lot of property, but if he was trying to beat you,
Yeah.
still you'd be in serious trouble. Well, enough of that particular reminiscing, I guess. Now, I first remember you when you were beginning, I think, as the first music teacher in the Marshall County school system. I think I may have been a junior that year. Would that have been the fall of 39?
That's when I started.
Fall of 39. Now, tell us something about how big that job really was.
Well, in the first place, it was I pioneered it. It never had been done, so anything I did was going to be something, just anything. But it was quite a task. There were 45 one-room schools in Marshall County then.
And we still had 6 high schools.
6 high schools with 12 grades. Well, the first year, both years, the grade schools, the one-room schools started a month earlier than the high schools did. So I had that month. I visited each of those twice during that time. We learned a song. We listened to music. I gave them a music appreciation lesson. And then I taught them enough about music in general, just to get them interested in wanting to. Some of the teachers could sing. Some of them could carry it on. But even though I wasn't there. But at the end of that month, I had to leave them. But I gave them everyone that much. We learned God Bless America. This was right before the war, and we were getting patriotic. And the national anthem. Every child in Marshall County learned those 2 songs. And then I remember one of the music they listened to was the Peer Gynt Suite and the Nutcracker Suite. Those were 2 things that
Edvard Grieg.
Yes. And
was he one of your favorites?
He was one of my favorites. And then I went on to the high schools.
You had built up quite a reputation and some little name in this area as a singer with the big bands, had you not?
Well,
from the Murray State.
It was enough to give me I got on a little ego trip there. I sang with the first dance band. There had been another dance band. There hadn't been a vocalist with it, but there had been a dance band.
What was that? Was that?
That was the Cannon. Now, Leroy Offerman band was the one I sang with.
But Cannon had been there first.
He was there first. But Paul Bryant was the music teacher here, the music director.
And one of the greats, was he?
Yes, he was very good, very good. But also in high school, I had sung quite a bit. I sang before I taught. Music was in our family very much. We had a piano, we had a Victrola. We went to musical shows in Paducah when we always had a car. Everybody else went on trains. Don't ask me anything about trains because I don't know. As far as the only train ride I took was from here to Hardin to my grandmother's and back.
I guess your dad led singing in more revivals than anybody had ever lived.
True. And I evidently was born singing nearly. But back to the big band. Yes, I sang in college. Then when I didn't want to make a teacher. But that was all there was to do at that time. This was right at the Depression, no money, nothing. I wanted to go to Michigan or to Northwestern and be a newspaper. I wanted to go into journalism. Well, to make a long story short, I got a minor in journalism in college, but I did participate in music very much, in the band and whole works. Well, then when I started working down here that year, the Calvert City wanted a band. Well, for goodness sakes, a band is a whole job in itself.
That's right.
There were 3 or 4 of the high schools where
Now you couldn't even spend a one day a week.
I would have to use my noon hour going from one school to another, so I could go twice a week to each of the high schools. I did that, but it was difficult. Gibbertsville and Birmingham were close enough that no, Gibbertsville had already been. That's right. There was no Gibbertsville school at that time.
Gilbertsville and Birmingham closed. The last year they operated was
Birmingham and Calvert City absorbed Gibbertsville High School.
Yeah.
That's the way it was. And but in every school, I had all the grades. I went to each group of grades, and we had rhythm bands in the first grades, and then we had courses and everything in the others. Got to high school, you had a boys quartet, a girls trio, a chorus, and all this in all 6 schools.
Yeah.
Well, it did pretty good until Christmas, when I had to be everywhere at once.
Everyone wanted a Christmas program.
Everyone. And then I learned, at graduation time, on graduation night, I was supposed to be at every place, and I couldn't. But usually there was someone in a school. Now, I know Martha Chester out at Brewers was very good on the piano, and they could, after they once learned it, she could take it over. And in some of the other schools, there were people who would have to take it over when I couldn't be there. But
Sure.
it was an experience. But then I got married, and the war came along, and I quit school forever, I thought. And then later, I came back to Benton and started working in the bank for 7 years, and then the job at school here, the library. I had worked in a library even in high school, and in the library going to college, I made $15 a month, and that paid for my room and board. And
Wasn't that tremendous?
$15. I'll tell you one better than that. In 1933, I went with Mr. and Ms. Wolf and Irene and Carolyn and Joe Wolf. We went to Chicago to the World's Fair, on to Detroit. We were gone 2 weeks, and it cost $15. We went to the Aragon Ballroom
in Chicago.
We went to at the fair. We saw Ben Burney. That was the worst thing. We went into this place to see Ben Burney, and they didn't have a cover charge. So oh boy! But we sat down and realized we had to buy a Coke, and it was 55 cents. That was like a great. We stayed in an apartment out on the beach. Up on the north side, out on the lakefront.
Lakeshore Drive.
A wonderful apartment, furnished and everything.
Yeah.
Miss
That's
Wolf
the
had taken a
Gold
ham.
Coast.
That's right. She had taken a ham, and that was the basis of our food. But I thought, just think. And I nearly didn't get to go because Daddy did not have $15 to let me go. The day I had to say, I'm going in the morning. I went over on the bluff to cry because I wasn't going to get to go because Daddy didn't have $15. And I heard Mother call me. It was about noon. Daddy'd come home at noon. He had sold an insurance policy and had $17.
As a
that
commission.
was his commission. So he gave it to me to go to the World's Fair, which was marvelous.
Yeah.
And then we got to see Marshall
Daddies are
Field.
wonderful.
Oh, daddies are
And
wonderful. He always was. Just so good to us. But
mothers,
Ray,
too, of course.
talking about, we always had a car. As long as I could remember, we had a car.
Mm-hmm.
We always went to things like, I can remember, one of the first things I can remember is going to a boat, a river boat down at Birmingham, one where they had those old plays, had candlelight around the stage. I can remember that. And
that brought quite a list of culture to Marshall County in those days.
That too, and then at that time, of course, we had one thing: girls basketball and boys basketball were played in the those buildings down on the tobacco barns down on the railroad.
Yes.
And so that was going on. But we had at the school, even as far back as I can remember, we had Chautauquas. You know what that is?
Oh,
Lyceums?
yes.
Okay.
The Red Path was the largest one I remember, but they scheduled all sorts of plays and talks,
right.
lectures.
And the one I remember most, I was about 4 years old, I think, and I was a baby doll in the program. and I was in this big box, and all the world I had to do was just say, bend over and say, Mama. But I remember very well there was a toe dancer there. We call them toe dancers. It wasn't a balletist.
Mm-hmm.
But she was Dr. Reeder's daughter, and she had come from Panama. And I can remember her, before she went out on stage, seeing her, and just marvelous the way she danced, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
when she came back out, she sat down and cried with her feet. And I can remember that as well.
Her feet
But,
were hurting.
oh, yeah.
Well, that's entirely human reaction.
I guess so, but it's strange that I can remember that one little thing. Then we went to Paducah to the old Orpheum Theater. We would go down there periodically to
Mhm.
see those shows down there. I saw the Sousa's band, and
John Philip
he
Sousa.
came to the old Orpheum Theater, and also we saw some New York plays. They brought New York troops down there to. There was a stage that old Orpheum, and then of course later there were riverboats down at Paducah. I have meant to throw in some names here because I know there's some, but I can't. The one thing I do want to tell you that was so typical of evidently just a small town. Every boy here that was in my group, I ran around with a group that lived in my area in town. I was about the youngest one. There were some boys my age, but all the boys we used their double names like Albert Rowe and John Clay and Henry Harden and Joe Pete and Joe Cross, Will Ben. Uh,
That's a
Ben
southern
Thomas.
characteristic.
Used both names.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in town.
Rural southern. It's
It
still
is.
true. Yeah.
Is it?
Mhm.
Well, good. But that's what this town was. Just a,
Oh yeah. Even the big football players like Johnny Mack Brown at Alabama or John David Crow. All
You don't just call them the one
no,
name. You
they were
say, "Oh,
always
okay."
yeah.
But that and
Yeah.
the
Joe Cross Creason, as long as he lived, we called him that, didn't we?
true. He was a very dear friend. We were in a senior play together. He was a junior, but we didn't. We had a very small class, and he was in the senior play with us.
Mm-hmm.
And we had lots of high school plays. We had lots of
Yes.
them, and it was fun. And before that, though, Italy Connor from Murray had come down, and my father and mother, a lot of their friends were a little bit younger than they were, and they had a lot of music.
Mm-hmm.
There was at my house there was always a lot of music, and
Mhm.
most anywhere we went. Of course, we went to church a lot, and Daddy especially went to church a lot all
Mhm.
summer long, leading singing. After I got so old, I didn't go. But anyway, they had. She came down and gave those plays, and they were just wonderful. I can still remember how. But I was young enough. I would learn the song and the words, and Daddy then would learn it for me. Rather than, I was always one. I liked to sing.
Now, before we get totally away from it and forget it entirely, when you finished, were you married at the time you finished college? You married
No,
what? To
I
Crim?
married Curtis Crim.
Curtis Crim.
in-
Did he go to Murray State?
No, his family his family had come in with TVA. Oh, at that time, we were having this influx of people.
Oh yes.
And he was from Alabama, and we married in 1940, and then he went into service in.
Now you had a son.
Ben Curtis Crim.
Now where does he live now?
He lives in Nashville.
Nashville.
And he has 3 children, and the oldest one now is a junior in college.
It's hard for me to
It's
imagine.
true.
And
And
then
then,
he was killed.
Yes, the day war was, August the 15th, 1945. He was a pilot, and he was co-pilot on this day when they took C-47. They were taking supplies up to Berlin from Metz and bringing released prisoners of war back down to
Mhm.
Metz. He was the only 2 times he saw action. He was in a glider, and at one time he was a pilot towing a glider. But now, and he was killed in August of 45. Then Ned Pace, whom I married in
Mhm.
1947. Kurt was an officer, and never did really see very much action. Had sheets on the bed and all this. But Dad had been in the Pacific in
It was a different war in the
different
trenches
war.
over there. wasn't it?
He was a sergeant in the Army aircraft artillery, and his group went in right behind the Marines, the whole island hopping all the way into Seoul, Korea. He ended up, when the war was over, he went to Seoul. He thought he was going to get to go to Russia. He had put in for, and just everything was working, and all of a sudden, here came the orders to go home.
War was over and it was all ended. Well, here's another little footnote through you, and of course Ned had mentioned it before he died, but the Westinghouse Model 1 radio that you have
Yes.
donated to the Rather West Kentucky Jackson Purchase, or whatever you want to call it, museum at Murray State, will of course forever enshrine his memory and yours.
Yes, I think
And
I'm proud of that. He was a keeper of stuff.
I understand
really
that
did.
wonderful Model T that he
Model
had.
T,
Ben
yeah.
has that.
It's here, but it's Ben's.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Now, okay, we brought you up, and you're in the school system, and you're just working yourself to death. Now, how long did you go at that before you decided that you just couldn't take it anymore?
Well, I'll tell you, I had Ben, so I had to quit.
Oh, birth. Yeah.
That took care
Janie.
of that situation.
Janie had to quit teaching the year Ruth Ann was born.
that got me out of that. And then the war took over. And then I went everywhere with Kurt. And Ben and I followed along with him out into Texas and Arkansas and everything. But then when he went overseas, we came home. Then after he was killed, it was right at the time when they needed me in the bank badly. I had worked in the bank since I was 12 years old, especially during, you don't remember, but we used to have big strawberry seasons in Marshall County.
Oh, I was growing them.
Oh, well, okay. But I would get to work in the bank when time I was about 12 years old so I knew banking. I mean, I knew how to handle it. So
Shelby was telling me about his first, he went up to the bank. He'd come here in 39 as manager of the Benton Theater for Mr. Ruffing. And he had a Ford, about a 39 Ford, I think, but the tires are worn out. And so he wanted to buy a new set of tires, and he estimated it'd cost him $50. So he went in the bank and he talked to May, your sister, and he said, I need $50 to buy some tires. She said, well, why not take 100? And he said he almost fainted, said he'd never been used to that in Tennessee where he grew up. They'd always make you sign in blood or something, you know, and question you all about who your mother was and your daddy and so forth.
Well, Shelby, I think Daddy had done well. Anyway, he.
Of course, he was manager of a
and he belonged.
sizable
He belonged
business.
to the Young Men's
business Progress Club.
Progress Club.
Yeah,
So that kind of made him eligible for a little bit. That Progress Club
Very
was
good.
a very good thing.
Now you worked there a while, and when did you ever decide to go back to school system?
Well, I tell you, after a few Christmases, at Christmas that was when we worked 6 days in the bank. And Christmas we got off one day. Thanksgiving you got off one day. Well, Christmas, trying to get ready for a family for Christmas and do all your shopping, work till 5 o'clock the afternoon before and go back Christmas Day, the day after Christmas, and go back to work and piled up, because one day off.
And you could just see those lazy school teachers getting off 2 weeks.
2 weeks, and not only that, in the summertime, there I was slaving away all the time, 6 days a week. Well, I'd get the summers off. So I went back to school in the summer and got 30 hours of library science, a little over 30 hours of library science, because I already knew I knew enough about it, and I started working before I even started back to school
Yeah.
in the library.
They made us all take at least one library science course when I was graduated from Murray State, and I think that's good.
Well, see, when I went, there was no library science. There had been before because Ina Joe Pace was the librarian here when I was in high school, and I.
Jonah Gibson was head of the department.
That's true. Well, and by the time we went back for those hours that I picked up, Miss Center, Rosanna Center, was she taught in a she was very good. She was very good.
Pikeville College.
So after about 3 summers, I had that taken care of, and then I just went just fine, and I enjoyed it very much. And it's so strange that of all the kids that are running around, once they got out of high school, they're all the same age. You know, I can't put them in any place, and I know their names. Of course, they all know me, but I don't know their names that goes with the faces. Yet they're children all over there. Children. I even had I was there long enough that I even had some of their children.
Now you saw quite a progress in the system, certainly
yes.
from the time you started originally, but then when you began teaching. I think the first year I was in the Marshall County system, Dad had rented places here and there, and when I'd been in Callaway, I went to New Concord for a while. But I came back, and I believe the last year when all 8 high schools were operating was 38, 39. I was a sophomore that year, and we still had Gilbertsville and Birmingham. Then when they closed, that left 6. I was a sophomore that year, and we still had Gilbertsville and Birmingham. Then when they closed, that left 6.
Now I didn't start until 39.
So you started
39,
40. So I was a junior that fall.
You were in the quartet.
Yes, I sang in your quartet.
You sure did.
I learned what little I know about reading notes from you. And I shall ever be grateful for it. I think it was wonderful to add. The high schools were so small. About all you could teach were the basics, and to get a little bit of culture or additional the arts, I think was good.
Yes. Well, of course, Murray at that time was just the music department was just growing and becoming more. Everybody knew that Murray had a good music department.
Now, you finally ended up, where were you first a librarian?
At Benton.
At Benton. And then you stayed there until the new high school opened?
Yes. Well, when we moved the high school over into the other building here in Benton, I went with the high school library. And then when we went into the other system and built the new high school, I went out there.
And that is really a beautiful library.
Well, we worked on it hard, believe me.
In fact, how many librarians did you then have?
We had 3 at first. It took that. See, we had to enlarge it so much. We had to get new things. We had to take what we wanted from each one of our libraries. There were 3 librarians in the county then. 2 in the county. And
coordinate all that.
Put all of that together into one good catalog. But mostly, and I've got to get this little thing in, from Benton. When I first went to Benton, there were some books there that gave me a start on concentrating on Kentucky works, anything about Kentucky. And I took most of that with me, and we added to that. And they have a real good Kentucky collection, and in art as well as books. But mostly the books, we concentrated on that.
Very good. You know, a half an hour has just gone bam, bam. Is there anything else you just must say before we quit?
Oh, no, I've enjoyed it, really. I had hoped to throw in more names because I think in a thing like this that people do like to have names mentioned. But we just didn't get around to it, did we?
No. We got too many interesting side trails. Our guest today has been Margaret Trevathan Krim Pace.
Ray, just a minute. There's one more word. You won't believe my name and how I ever learned to spell on my name. Margaret Revelle Trevathan Krim Pace. Now that's a whole lot of names.
Yeah, 5 names.
Well, 5 names.
But that's great. And she's been a wonderful citizen in the county, and of course her parents, well, her father was, her mother's still living, and it's been a real pleasure to have her. She's now retired as a librarian from the high school. This is Ray Mofield, and we've just concluded another tape in the Kentucky State series, which goes to Frankfort for the archives, one for Murray State's Pogue Oral History Library, and WCBL is paying for a copy for the Marshall County Library System. This is Ray Mofield speaking.